Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Courtney Hayes. I am the Habitat Connectivity Program Director at Wild Virginia. And tonight I am so pleased to be hosting the Wildlife Crossings webinar live from the Liberty Canyon. I am not at the Liberty Canyon crossing, as this is in Los Angeles, where we are going to be joined by Beth Pratt, who is the Regional Executive Director for California's National Wildlife Federation. And we are very excited to have her as she has done some great conservation work, and her conservation work has been featured in the Washington Post, the New Yorker, the Wall Street Journal, NPR. She's given a TED Talk about coexisting with wildlife, and she's just really inspiring to hear talk, and this project is really inspiring to hear about. So I'm very excited to share that story with you and have Beth join us today live from the crossing. But before I pass it over to Beth, I am very pleased and very lucky to be able to introduce you all to Senator Dave Marsden. Senator Marsden is our champion for wildlife corridor legislation in Virginia, and his work cannot be understated. He was pivotal in getting the Wildlife Corridor Action Plan bill passed, and we are very lucky to have him with us today and have him on our side for wildlife corridor work. So without further ado, Senator Marsden, I am glad to pass it over to you and hear some words from you.
Advantage of federal funding and move us forward in protecting not only our property, because there's been $500 million of damage every year in Virginia from wildlife strikes, and but protecting human life as well as the welfare of our animal friends, who need to be able to move through the barriers that we've placed in their way for them to be able to find food, to mate, and to live their lives. And we've had one incident in Virginia where we have put up a wildlife crossing on Interstate 64 west of Charlottesville, and it's been somewhere in the mid-90s in terms of the reduction that we've seen in animals being hit, because we put up fencing that funneled animals into culverts that passed underneath the interstate and allowed them to pass easily from one side to the other without risking their lives or those of Virginia citizens who are driving at high speeds on these roads. It was interesting. Last year we got the bill through the House and the Senate, but we failed because of the funding requirements in the budget process between the House of Delegates and the state Senate. But wildlife corridors are something that we can't avoid. It's something that needs to be done. The federal government is supporting it. It allows for animals to be able to exist in the wild and not interact inappropriately with us in our suburban and urban areas, as well as the danger they present in communities throughout Virginia. I had one delegate who was on the committee who said he had both of his cars in the body shop, because of deer strikes in Fauquier County, Virginia. This is serious business. It causes damage. It's a threat to human life, and certainly it is not something that the animal kingdom wouldn't benefit from. And interestingly enough, I have found sometimes there's more interest in my rural colleagues in opening up culverts that exist under roads to allow fish to migrate upstream and spawn, because of the need that people feel for fishing. And we have huge problems here in Fairfax County, where I come from, with deer in people's backyards, because they're trying to live a wildlife existence in a suburban area, and it's very difficult for the deer. And they get into my wife's flowers, which keeps her on a constant state of alert with me to make sure that I'm doing something about these wildlife corridors. But it's important. I know out west they're taking the lead in doing this, and in Virginia we're going to keep pushing till we can get this through. But we did get the bills through. It's just a question of finding the matching funding we need for federal dollars. But it's really great to be here. This is an important cause to make sure that we provide not only for our own safety, but for the safety of our wildlife. And I want to thank you all for having me here tonight to participate in this event.
Thank you so much, Senator Marsden. And again, just thank you so much for all the work you do for wildlife corridors in Virginia. Please feel free to stick around, and we will now turn it over to Beth Pratt. And do you want to give a little introduction about where you're at before I start going through your slides?
Yeah, what I thought I'd do, before we go to the slides, I'm gonna just give a little blurb, and then you are really lucky, you're getting 2 for 1. The person holding the camera I'm gonna put on camera is Robert Rock. He is the lead designer and architect that has been working with Caltrans to design this. So I wanted him to say a few words about what you're seeing and where we're at. But first of all, thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me. I think it's just an amazing time for wildlife crossings. Their time has come. A reporter here in LA wrote an article about our crossing and saying that overall, this is going to be the age architecturally of wildlife crossings. They have the public support. They have so many benefits, like the senator talked about, human safety, biodiversity, and also I think there's something even deeper than just the practical benefits, which is we all have a connection with wildlife. Nobody likes to see them killed, and this is a problem we can solve. And what you're looking at right now is the site of the Liberty Canyon, or the Wallis Annenberg Wildlife Crossing. We've been here all day doing out on some press and donor tours because you're here to help us celebrate. We broke ground in April on Earth Day, had a wonderful event, and construction started, but it was kind of minor stuff that wasn't very sexy, surveying and relocating some utilities. But the first big bulldozers and earth moving started this week. So we were here celebrating that. And it's, for me, who's been working on this for a decade, I can't even tell you how emotional I'm getting today just seeing the first earth move. So it's a really exciting project. When I get into my slides, and thank you, we're going to try to do this because I've been out in the field all day with me looking at slides here and you transitioning them there. But Robert is somebody who at the end, I do want to leave time for questions. He can also answer expert questions. This took a village. We want to be here to help you in your efforts and learn from us and what expertise and how we did things and the mistake we made. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Liberty Canyon, a few things we did, and then we'll entertain lots of time for questions. But I'm going to switch places here with Robert so he can talk to you about where we're at in the construction process and his work for the crossing.
Hey, everybody. As Beth said, I'm Robert Rock. I'm with a landscape architecture practice based in Chicago called Living Habitats. We've been leading the design effort and collaborating with Caltrans and the final engineering drawings for the project. You can see over here on the right, you see kind of a triangular inflection on the hillside. That's where the crossing will connect on the north side of the freeway. And I think it's a little bit difficult to see here because of where we're at up on the mountain slope is the work being done on the adjacent slope on the south side of the freeway, where there's some work being done on geosynthetic reinforced earth to stabilize that slope before the abutment starts construction here, which we'll end up seeing here over the course of the next couple of weeks. But aside from that, you're seeing my incredibly sweaty face because Beth just forced me to walk up about 500 feet in elevation. And I'm from Chicago. I don't have the kind of elevation I've got to deal with, so I apologize for that. But to the senator's point about the economic impact and the human safety coefficient that go along with these types of efforts is entirely on point. That is one of the primary reasons behind and motivation behind these types of efforts is that piece of human safety and the economic impact these type of collisions have. And it's universal across all states, all jurisdictions. It's not just in one location. So the efforts that you're going through right now and the support at that legislative level from the senator and his colleagues is incredible. And I commend him for it. And thank you for allowing me to say a little bit today.
Cool. And Robert's a great resource for, again, design, engineering, and everything. Before I switch back to me being in the view, I do want to show you, we are in the Santa Monica Mountains right now, just to give you a sense of place. That freeway you're looking at is the 101. It's one of the busiest freeways in the world, 300,000 cars a day. And then if you look at the Santa Monica Mountains here, the edge you're seeing of blue sky and peak, that's the Pacific Ocean. We are just a few miles from the Pacific Ocean. So it's just such a special place. And this is what we're connecting, this large landscape across one of the busiest freeways all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So it's really exciting. If you want to go to the slides, I'll just run through them quick. Listen, I think I'm preaching to the choir here, so I don't have to get into like the slide. It's hard to do this in the field. Look, slide doesn't work without connection. I think we all know that. When I was coming up in conservation 30 years ago and getting my biology field degree, you know, we thought that nature was okay with islands of protected area. We put a Yosemite aside, we put a wildlife refuge aside, a state park, we're good. Well, we now know, and this is what I like about science, we admit when we're wrong, that doesn't work. We need this large landscape connectivity for wildlife and plants. It's flora and fauna to be full. This fragmentation, the genetic isolation does not build for resilient ecosystems, especially in light of challenges like climate change, you know, increased fires, although that might be more a California thing or a West thing, all the challenges that wildlife and people are facing these days. If you go to the Wallis Annenberg Crossing, that first slide, that visualization that Robert put together, one of the things I like to point out about this crossing, and this doesn't have to be the same for every crossing, but to my point about ecosystem resiliency, there are crossings that are just designed to get animals across the road, and that's fine. We don't actually have a big roadkill problem here. The animals just avoid it. We have over 100,000 GPS points of animals in this area. And what we know is they get to this freeway and they turn around for the most part. Some try and some get killed, but they turn around. And so it's also sometimes these massive barriers like the 101 freeway, which I wouldn't even try to cross, that creates isolation. So there's both the roadkill that points to these places we need to make whole, but sometimes a lack of roadkill can also be an indicator. And that's why this crossing is being designed to reconnect the ecosystem for wildlife large and small, and to have a native plant landscape on top. Is our problem was bigger. We were going to have a species that went extinct, the mountain lions, as well as the National Park Service, who did this groundbreaking research, showed that that genetic isolation was also playing out down the food chain in lizards and quail. So the goal of our crossing, which was a little different, was to make the ecosystem whole. And I hope more crossings will consider that. Sometimes money's an issue, fair enough, but I feel like if we're gonna put these conveyance systems across the road, let's throw a habitat on top of it as well. If you scroll down to the slides, there's one that just shows the location. That's a helicopter from the air. And I think it's this Google Maps slide, if you go to that, that really shows how the open space funnels down here. There's plenty of open space south of the freeway where we're standing, and there's a lot of open space north of the freeway, all the way up to Los Padres National Forest, hundreds of miles. But it's not connected, and it funnels the wildlife down to the last 1,600 feet of where there's protected open space on both sides of the freeway, which is right here. It's really the only place we could put this crossing. The next slide shows mountain lions with kittens, because everybody loves kittens. And again, the reason I worked relentlessly for 10 years is these mountain lions were out of time. They were actually, if you go to the next slide, starting to show birth defects in 2020, which meant sterility was probably next. So we had to get this done quickly, or else the mountain lion population wasn't going to be there. Also fires, that's the next slide. Mountain lions can escape fire by moving, yet if a freeway is in their way, that's a barrier. We've actually had that happen where we've lost mountain lions in fires because of that freeway barrier. And that is some burnt paws of P64 who actually survived the immediate fire, but could not get out of the fire zone because of roadways. And that's how I just think about connectivity in different ways. It's not just that they can't get across roads because of the traffic. It also plays out with some of these other challenges. And again, that's why we're designing it for the next slide, an array of species with the habitat on top. And I think that's pretty hopeful. You have one of the busiest freeways in the world that when people are driving under it are going to have wildlife not just walking over it like a mountain lion or coyote, but living on it like a fence lizard or a monarch butterfly. It proves that even a freeway is not irredeemable. And if you go to the next slide, that is a western fence lizard trying to cross a road. And I just like to remind people, it's not just about the big stuff. Don't leave off the small stuff. The next slide is tadpoles. Watch this, Google this documentary. It'll change the way you think about, again, connectivity. It's more than just roads. It can be waterways, things like that. I could give a whole talk on how light, sound, human development, social impacts to connectivity. What this project's really done for me is show that, yeah, we need to solve these big freeway crossings, but there's much more to impediments for connectivity for wildlife than just roads. So I just wanted to put that in. How we did this though, let me get to that. That's the slide with all the logos on it, with the California quail. This took a village. It was such a great example of a public-private partnership of people coming together, whether it be Wallis Annenberg and the Annenberg Foundation on the private side, Governor Gavin Newsom and the Wildlife Conservation Board, Caltrans, the National Park Service. This was, people knew we needed to get this done. And all over the world, it wasn't just an LA story or a California story. And I do hope that, again, efforts like ours can help ease and pave the way for more funding for efforts like yours. And I think it's already happening. As we know, the federal government, the National Wildlife Federation was very active in getting in the infrastructure package a year ago, that $350 million. Our state, Governor Newsom, is putting in money for more crossings, and hopefully that's going to translate into your area at some point as well. The next slide is groundbreaking, which I love that photo because it is. It's the public sector. It's Wallis Annenberg sitting there. It's Caltrans and also the community. This was a big public effort as well. Not just us as environmentalists sitting behind closed doors. It was us really getting the public engaged. And if you get to the next slide, you know, part of that was the press. There was something about this story that captured the imagination of people across the world. And that's to the slide of the 1 billion media impressions. And that's what I will tell you, really think about your story, because I'm a scientist, it's not my day job, but the science is important and you have to lead with the science. The science told us that there was a problem. The science told us that where we need to do it and how, but the science doesn't get these projects built. It's capturing the imagination of the public, of your agencies. These agency heads are people too. And I'll tell you, they respond to mountain lion kittens getting killed just like the public does. So you really need to think about your story and how you tell that, because that is what will get these ambitious projects done. The next, I just put a quote that what is kind of unique about this is the urbanness. Nobody's ever attempted to do this in an urban area. We were told we were crazy and why would you waste time? There's wildlife everywhere. And I think that you know that, but when you go to the public, you know, these conservation projects just don't need to take place in these remote areas. And I think that's a lesson for Liberty, that they can be done anywhere. The next slide is a video. If you want to press play, I thought it'd be fun to show that here we have this $90 million project. And if you play that video, if it works, we'll tell you what was the first delay on a $90 million project.
We're here on the construction site for the world's largest wildlife crossing. Construction was already supposed to have begun, but it hasn't. So we are here to find out what has caused the first delay for this $90 million crossing.
The first delay is due to a pair of acorn woodpeckers nesting within a Verizon wireless utility pole. It's just kind of ironic that we have to protect this nest, but we're putting this project on hold. That's also supposed to help wildlife connectivity. It's funny that it's a utility pole versus like a tree also, so.
So acorn woodpeckers caused the first delay. There's something so fitting about we were trying to hike up to a point where you could see some of the bulldozers, but we ran out of time. But the next slide shows you we actually have a live construction camera up. If you go to saveLAcougars.org, just scroll down and you will see. You can tune in anytime, day or night. In fact, a lot of the construction is going on at night, and you can see the big structure or part of it is going to start going up in mid-October. So it's going to be really fun to see that. I'm going to skip the next video, but I will send a link to everybody just in the interest of time because I want to get to your questions. But getting back to that, I just wanted to end with this storytelling. I can't stress this enough. We forget as scientists, we all connected to wildlife. not because we were told science in second grade, but because our imaginations were captured by something. For me, it was horseshoe crabs. I missed them in California. I actually grew up in Massachusetts. We don't have them out here. It was frogs in my backyard. It was watching Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. And this slide that shows the story of P22, and if you scroll to that incredible journey that he made, that map with that red line, how can people not respond to that? Look at that urbanization he went into just to find a new home. And although that Hollywood photo, which is the next slide, is a great photo and it really tells the story, that next photo of him is my favorite because that's what he sees every day. That's what this mountain lion faces, and that's what we're trying to solve. The other thing I want to say, if we go to the Brad Pitt slide, have fun. This doesn't need to be serious. This was a lot of work, a lot of challenges. I didn't get a lot of sleep, but we had fun with it. And the public responded to that as well. Your Elk Project, name some elk. Come on, I used to live in Yellowstone with elk. They do some wacky things. I bet you can come up with some really good elk characters who could be like if not the Brad Pitt, the Robert De Niro of the of the wildlife world. And also, I really appreciate the senator being there. Having our governor tweet out, "I heart mountain lions" or "I heart P22." I mean, that inspires a lot of confidence. And again, it shows that most people love wildlife, and that's why these things get built. We do a P22 day. If you scroll through the next few slides, officially declared by the city, you could have an elk day. Here's some of the posters from our past festivals. And P22 day this year is the 22nd of October. I invite any of you who want to come out. It's a great chance to learn about wildlife crossings, coexistence, and how we got this built. 9,000 people came to our last in-person P22 days. So it's pretty fun. And there's some photos of some kids. We really involve the schools. We do curriculum-based project learning, and they love it. The kids in the school area around here, and that's the whole LA school district and beyond, are so proud of having this learning experience in their backyard. There is the first rally we did at the site in 2014, and we're building it. This is a really emotional moment to be sharing with you. I also do like to say at the end, if you think we were crazy running around with cardboard cutouts of mountain lions and talking about them being the Brad Pitt of the cougar world, we raised $98 million on it. So I got the receipts. This approach works, and happy to help as you move forward in yours to get the funding needed. We have a motto in this campaign, which is the next slide: slap a kitten on it. And hey, elks have babies too. I've seen them born. Nothing cuter than a little elk calf. So slap an elk calf on it. And I just ended with some photos of your elk situation there. And that steep slope and that road there, I think the good news is it is solvable. And I think with a team like yours, you can do it. We did it. I really think anybody can, and we are here to help. Guidance, whatever you need to help get you there. We're here if you have time to answer any questions. So thank you so much for the time and sharing this special day with us of the first earth moving. Let's walk down the hill, as they asked.
While they're walking down the hill, I wanted to pass this over for a second to Bridget Donaldson. So you heard Beth mention a few times the Elk Project. So I didn't really do a good job of introducing that, but if I pass it over to Bridget Donaldson here, if I can make you a co-host, there we go. You should be able to turn your camera on and speak with us, and you can talk a little bit about this Elk Project. So Bridget Donaldson works for VDOT, and she is kind of leading the research study behind this Elk and Wildlife Crossing project. So Bridget, thank you for joining us.
Sure. And I do not want to steal Beth's thunder because I know we have good questions for her, but I'll just summarize quickly. First of all, my heart is racing because I am so inspired right now and so excited for what we can do. I feel like it's our turn in Virginia. It's our turn in the Eastern US. We have nothing like this to this scale in the Eastern US. So the project that Courtney and Beth were referring to is in southwestern Virginia in Buchanan County. There's a reintroduced elk population there. Several years ago, the Department of sorry, it was used to be the Game and Inland Fisheries Department of Wildlife Resources, reintroduced an elk population about 75, and they've grown to 250. The problem is those photos that Beth showed are a road that's being constructed through like deep in the Appalachian Mountains around coal mining areas. And it's 14 miles long, and the elk are living on that reconstructed road, most of which will be open to traffic a year from now. And so we've been studying, we're going to wrap up our study in a couple months, but I'm the lead researcher with the Virginia Department of Transportation, figuring out how to construct a series of wildlife crossings. So we're talking about many structures, some overpasses and some underpasses along this road that we call Corridor Q. And it has a ton of benefits. So Beth was talking about lead with the research and then tell a good story. This has a good story, and we're counting on folks like Courtney with Wild Virginia and Senator Marsden to tell the story, help with the funding. But that story is that these elk are kind of precious, and they would be potentially wiped out by cars over a number of years, let alone the risk to driver safety. It's also in a really poor area in the Appalachians. The elk are already bringing a lot of tourists in, they're stimulating economic development. So we want to preserve that population and also probably increase tourism and the attention to the area, just like this mountain lion crossing is getting. So we're going to be done with our study in February, and then VDOT will hopefully be seeking funding opportunities. We don't know if that will get us all the way there, or if folks will have to fundraise or do legislation. But hopefully this would be the first project of its kind in the Eastern US. So thank you to folks like Beth that make this kind of visible to everyone in the country, and to people like me who know that our hard work is going to pay off in the near future.
Thank you so much, Bridget. Beth, if you can hear us, if anybody wants to ask some questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and I will go ahead and read them off to Beth. So feel free to type them in there. I'm going to start with one that actually came from Bridget. She is wondering, how long is the fencing that will be associated with the crossings?
Boy, that's a really good question, and we don't have an answer yet, right, Robert? The fencing length is still to be determined, right?
The limits of the fencing?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we are still in the process of developing that through with Caltrans and with the biologists, but it really is about connecting down as far away from the crossing as we can to the next interchanges, so that we are creating exclusionary fencing that funnels wildlife to the crossing location.
I should put this back on here. Now you can see us. We do know this, as we know, you need exclusionary fencing. I mean, that is one of the, the decades of science around wildlife crossing. You need to cut off their options. And so we're trying to go big with fencing, although, we'll see how successful, but we will have some. We just don't know the length. But that is one of the measures of success. I've learned from Tony Clevenger, one of the rock stars of the wildlife crossing world, who has designed them all over the world. You need that fencing, definitely. So it's a good question.
Great, thank you. Another person is wondering, what does P22's diet consist of in the urban setting versus what would it be in the wild?
It's a great question, and it may surprise you because he is living in Griffith Park under the Hollywood sign with Brad Pitt as a neighbor. It's still like 87% deer. He is, Griffith Park has a big population of deer because you have all these Hollywood celebrities' homes with gardens, plus the Forest Lawn Cemetery where they're all grazing. So, the Park Service hikes out to almost every carcass. And what they're seeing with not just P22, but all these urban cats is they're still pretty much sticking the deer. I mean, that is what mountain lions really want. It's what they evolved to eat. And their diet's not much different. I would say the thing that they have here that they might not have elsewhere, what you have in this area is not so much, we don't have as many ranches, for sustenance, but a lot of alpacas and, people who are doing goat yoga and stuff. So I would say that that's something the mountain lions are definitely taking advantage of, but still it's definitely not the norm. I think it was 87% of their diet is still deer here. And we have plenty of it. We really do.
Thank you. That is actually really interesting to hear. Okay, so Another question in here has to do with funding, and it says, is the LA project done through state legislation, or is it a one-off project done entirely through donations?
Really good question. So this one did not go through the legislature at the beginning. I mean, it really is a Caltrans project that we agreed to privately fund. But as we got closer, legislation started happening. And there's now legislation in action to do more crossings. Governor Newsom put, I think it was 63 million last year in the budget for more crossings. We have some legislation that's on his desk right now. We didn't do it. The Center for Biological Diversity and the Mountain Lion Foundation did. And the Nature Conservancy, I'm forgetting, but that will actually set up more of a matrix for and more of a structure for how these crossings are done and funding. So that's kind of next. This was kind of a one-off. It's not that there weren't crossings in California, but there wasn't a crossing program. And I would say one of the more hopeful things that came out of this was Caltrans, who had never really done anything of this scale in the wildlife crossing arena. Their executive team, this is one of the largest DOTs in the world, had me talk after groundbreaking to how they could do wildlife crossings better. What did they need to be able to do more of these? And so I think what we're seeing is some of these legislations and structures being set up. We did have to kind of invent the wheel. I mean, that's part of being first out of the gate. I think if I had to start fundraising for Liberty Canyon right now, it would have been much easier. I am at the site now. We hiked down. I'm just going to show you real quick the bulldozers. There it is. Yay! This is the south side of the freeway. And this is where they're going to start putting the structure up. So it's really exciting. Anyway. Okay.
Courtney, this is
All right.
Senator Marsden.
Rock and roll. Hey, as long as you have questions.
Courtney, this is Senator Marsden. Can you hear me?
I can't.
A little bit. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that the arguments that we need to deal with is, it's one thing to get a combination of federal, state, private funding and put up a fence that will, direct animals, to a crossing. One of the concerns I've heard expressed is who's going to maintain, those fences. VDOT is pretty busy. Wildlife Services, has other functions that they, have to prioritize. So that's one issue. And the other issue is, how do we best explain to people that we're not going to solve all these problems with wildlife overnight, that it's a question of staying the course, getting things done in the high impact areas, and the fact that we can't do it all in 1 year, that it's going to take many, many years to get this under control, but ultimately we'll have a really great system to allow animals to move. But they kind of see it as, well, I don't want to take any money away from maintenance on the roads because transportation money is scarce, and our wildlife services operate mostly on fees, and so they're an agency that has to live on what money it raises. So how do you deal with those questions that I have heard a little bit of from other legislators?
Yeah, those were really excellent questions. And those are things we were really thoughtful about, because this is a visionary project, and it is one that is $90 million. The good news is, I don't think, and I've surveyed across the United States, I think we picked the biggest one out of the gate. Even in California, there's just no other area that would be, there's no other 101 freeway. So we were purposeful about that, really early on. We did not want to be perceived as taking money away from bridge repair. So at least for this one, we were like, we sector to step up, and where we did take public dollars would be money that had to be spent on conservation. And so that's things like, and I luckily do live in a state where, bond measures are passed by folks supportive of environmental measures. That's where some of our funds, big funds, came from that had to be spent on conservation. So I think, for me, it's just always being transparent. And I do think, though, long term, and for the reasons you also stated, these are also safety issues. They provide jobs. These are kind of win-win issues that do have a payoff. And I think talking about the economics of that helps in a lot of situations. And when you want to get legislation passed, I do believe that I should be out of a job, that these should eventually be embedded in transportation budgets. But Caltrans, I talked to them early on, that was their stress point, exactly what you said. We would build this for you. We just don't have a budget for it. And I think that if budget allocations are given to them long term, that takes the stress off these agencies. So I do think it is something that California and others are looking at, is starting to embed these. And as you know, because you said it, you can make a good economic case for starting to put these in budgets. But until then, I think the private sector has a really big role here, like they did with Liberty Canyon, because now, even Caltrans saw how the public supports these projects. And I think that should give legislators confidence that these are popular projects. The National Wildlife Federation is very much, we work with all sides of the aisle. There's Californians like me. We put together legislation with people who are, think about wildlife very differently. But that's what these wildlife crossings, we find, get support no matter what your background is. So I think that a lot of these things, and I'm happy to help share some of the legislation we've done, share some of the talking points with, how to talk about this, and that it is for the long haul. This has been a decade, and we were able to maintain public support through it, and now even past it. So I think looking at it is a long game and not a short game is how to approach these campaigns.
Thank you very much. That was such a great answer and very helpful. I'm taking lots of mental notes right now because this is what I think about all day long in this job. So this is so great. I'm so thankful that you're here. There's a few more questions that I think I know some answers to, but I would be interested to hear your answers to as well. We do have one question that says, aside from funding, congratulations, by the way, on that big lift. What other major roadblocks did you face along the way?
I think Robert was laughing. Which one? Let's see. I think one of the roadblocks was just organizing. I think that you really, and I'm not even say this is a roadblock. It's just something that if you need to be very clear about who's doing this. You need to have somebody communicating this. Like you need a Beth. You don't need to be as goofy as me, but somebody needs to be just every day getting a consistent message out.
I think the goofy helps.
The goofy might help, but early on, we had folks communicating this information that wasn't right, that wasn't on track. You know what I mean? There was just too many folks involved that was really diluting the project and not advancing it. And we actually brought in somebody from Federal Transportation to do a strategic session. And that challenge, and that's what I tell you, get very clear early on, who are the decision makers? And that's one thing we put together for this, because that really was holding us back. The people who had a financial stake in this is what we came up with, which is the National Wildlife Federation, Caltrans, and the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy and Caltrans. And we had a representative from each of those. It's a leadership committee, and that is the ultimate decision making, as well as communication, things like that. And that, once we got really solid about roles, responsibilities, authority, a lot of those challenges that came out from miscommunications or people making decisions that weren't in the best interest of the project, that went away. So I think that was the biggest challenge early on in the project, was to ensure we were just a lot more tight about advancing this and how it was advanced. I don't know, Robert, design challenges? I mean, any?
Well, I think, I could go into subtlety and nuance on specific things, but I think the bigger piece of this, when you're thinking about it from a framework perspective, is that every crossing is specific to the location where it's being built. And sometimes that means that the tools that are in the toolkit for the individual state DOT or Ministry of Transportation, depending on if you're here or you're on the other side of the border, is that sometimes that invention is not a bad thing. So having a willing partner to have that dialogue and providing the flexibility through the structure that Beth is talking about for that invention to occur. And so, in some respects, it means that putting, speaking from my experience, often I'm the one stirring the pot. I'm the one creating that kind of consternation and that back and forth with Caltrans, and they're a willing participant in the dialogue. It doesn't mean that we always agree, but being able to have a framework for the decision-making process when innovation is necessary, so that you are able to address things without just falling on the commonplace solution.
Yeah, I think a concrete example of that, DOTs are not set up for wildlife crossings. And although Caltrans has been amazing, we kept hitting sometimes specs, right? They're all about specs, and rightly so, but this was such a different thing for them. Just even, we had to do a different paint color, because one of the things we need on a freeway with 300,000 cars is we have to minimize light reflectivity or the wildlife won't use it. And it was so off spec, that color, that took a lot of working with Caltrans to make them feel comfortable about that. They're just protecting themselves. They're not doing anything wrong. They have these specs for a reason. So it's things like that, working through those challenges. I think, really developing a good relationship with your DOT and recognizing that when they are saying no, it's probably not because they don't want to do it. It's probably because of these systems in place that we, to build a wildlife crossing, have to continually push against.
Well, if I might add one additional thing to that. I mean, I think it's important that anyone who's coming at this from the perspective of the wildlife, who are pushing for these types of innovations, to recognize that interface with the DOT and what their mission really is. Their mission is the preservation of human life along those transportation corridors. That is one of their primary motivators. So not making light of that when we're looking to create an other than type solution, but find ways to meet in the middle, or reinforce that underpinning of the transportation agency in whatever the response is.
And the last thing I'll add to that is, this gets back to that public engagement, is that, legislators, Caltrans, the public being behind this and supporting it, and not just, again, being a few people wanting this to happen, gave them the confidence to flex. And I think that's a really important point. And that's why that long game is really important.
Yep, thank you so much. I think that our Elk Project, just really quick, specifically is pretty cool right now in the stage that's in, because the study is being initiated by VDOT, by our transportation. So it hasn't gotten so far as implementation yet, but even just that the VDOT is trying to identify where wildlife crossing should be and noticing that it is a solution to a problem, I think is a really good stepping point for us to get there, to try to catch up.
And I didn't answer the other part of the senator's question, which was about long-term maintenance. So we're lucky. Caltrans agreed to, although we didn't take transportation dollars away from building this, they did agree to assume responsibility for the structure in perpetuity, which is, I would have had to raise another 10 million for that, probably over a 100-year life. But the habitat on top, so the land on both sides is run by the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. So they're going to be responsible for the habitat on top. And I agreed to privately fundraise funds so that they would have in the bank, again, over perpetuity, to pay for that. It's not going to be a lot. You're just talking about, native plants and things like that. But still, I think it is important, especially as these come out of the gate. I think that's where most of the stress comes, right? As the senator observed, is funding. So if the private side can step up for some of these until these start being embedded in budget, and give people the confidence and the funding, so that they know they can proceed, I think that just takes all the pressure off.
Thank you for that. It is getting closer to the end, so if anybody has any last questions to throw in there, I do see a lot more questions in the chat, and I do want to say that any of the ones that I haven't had a chance to say, a lot of the answers, if you go to the Virginia Safe Wildlife Corridors Collaborative website, a lot of these questions that you're asking are answered on this website, and there's also a question form on there that you can feel free to fill out with if it doesn't explicitly answer any of your questions. After this meeting, after this webinar is over, I will also send, if Beth is okay with that, her contact information. And I will also send Bridget too if you have questions about the Elk Project, but I am also happy to field any questions about the Elk Project. Some last little wrap up things I wanted to say is that we are very thankful for you both for being here. Thank you, Senator Marsden, for being here, and thank you very much, Bridget Donaldson, for also being here and for all you all do for wildlife corridors. And I'm really glad that this is the village I found myself working with. So it's really cool and inspiring to have everybody here. Beth, is there anything else you'd like to say before I wrap up and announce who the winner of the gift card was?
Thanks for having us. Please consider us a resource. We're going to sign off here, but just excited for your project, and please let us know how we can help. Take care.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you both so much. All right. So to wrap things up, I will send out to the winner of the $50 Illumin Collect gift card, but it was Susan Shepperson. So we will be sending you an email with the link to that. So congratulations. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Wild Virginia would not be able to have our events like this, our webinars, our in-person events. I wouldn't be able to get to work with these amazing people working on wildlife corridors without your all's support. So if you guys could check out wildvirginia.org as well, we would really greatly appreciate it. Feel free to email me and email anybody else in this webinar with any questions. I will stay here for a few minutes and monitor the Q&A, but thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope you learned something and were inspired.
Thanks, Courtney. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Marsden.